Welcome everyone to this exciting edition of the Wayback Tech. In this video, I'm going to be putting a Socket 5 motherboard with VLB support through its paces. We're going to find out if VLB support was actually worth it on a Pentium motherboard. Was it any good? We're going to find out in this video. This motherboard is going to be running two processors that it was never designed or intended to run. To push as much data as we can through that VLB bus to the video card and find out, well, how much we can get out of the video card. So let's get started with this video, shall we? So here's the test subject for this video. This is another Opti-based motherboard, VLB, and this time this one has PCI as well. This was one of the other reasons why I was glad to find the Pentium 60 board with VLB on it, because that used the exact same chipset that this board uses. So I was able to get this board back up and running after 4 or 5 years of not being able to use this board because the BIOS going bad on it. Nevertheless, this board does support PCI, whereas the other one did not because of the added Opti 822 PCI bridge chip right here, interfacing the PCI, the VLB controller. At least that's what I think is going on this board. Unfortunately, this BIOS does not support the PCI slots on this motherboard. They're not functioning. I don't think the BIOS actually has the PCI support implemented in it. It could be disabled. 256K of level 2 cache is installed. This board has a very similar look to the previous board. It's also made in Taiwan. PCI 54PL-1, which I'm assuming means version 1, at least according to what I found on the internet anyway. And this board was made by a company called TMC Research Corporation. Just like the Pentium 60 board, this also runs a 32-bit memory controller. Has the exact same memory slot arrangement here, 372 pin and 430 pin. While this board only technically supports up to 100 MHz Pentiums, and it is multiplier locked, I cannot adjust the multiplier beyond 1.5. I have been able to get this board to run with a couple other processors. One being this Pentium MMX chip, 200 MHz, which on this board operates at 166 MHz because the minimum multiplier that this chip operates at is 2.5. So that's how we're getting around the 1.5 limitation of the board. The other chip on this test is going to be the IDT Win chip. Again, runs on this board, and it does run at 200 MHz, which is really cool. These IDT Win chips were considered to be an upgrade, a low-cost upgrade for the old Pentium Socket 5 and early Socket 7 system motherboards. So, in theory, it should work with any Socket 5 or Socket 7 motherboard, and this is about as early and as rare and as strange as you're going to get. And it works just fine on this board, so I guess they did a good job on that. Once again, this board does not support write-back cache. Just like the other board, the Pentium 60 board, I can only run right through on the level 2 cache. I don't know if it's a bug in the chipset or if it's a bug in the BIOS, but either way, the board will not complete post with write-back enabled on the level 2 cache, which is unfortunate. But we can clock the timings down on the cache just like on the other motherboard to get it down to where it performs as well as this is going to perform anyway. Once again, we're running the exact same video card, the Cardex T-Sang ET4000 based card, and the Super IDE controller with the 512K of memory on board to cache the data from the hard drive. Now that we got that out of the way, it's time to run the benchmarks on this motherboard and find out exactly if VLB implementation on a Pentium processor was actually worth it or not. Alright, to start off with, let's have a look at the Intel Pentium MMX chip running at 166 MHz here. You can see that the BIOS is only saying it's a 75 MHz because that's as high as this board can count. Let's look at top bench here. You can see we're scoring a 372, 373, respectable time, respectable score, not too bad. Take a look at config here. You can see we're running at a little over 166 megahertz, but you see all the stats of this board. VLB. We'll run the benchmark here real quick. And that's what I was saying in the last video about how this controller caches some of the routines and config here. You can see how fast the access time of this hard drive is because of that card. Take a look at hardware info here too. You can see it is definitely an Intel Pentium MMX chip. 136,000 dry stones. You can see we're detecting all of our level 1 and level 2 cache here. And there shouldn't be any errors. That's correct. So let's run a Superskate benchmark here. See what kind of score we get on this. This should run pretty quick here. And the score is 75.7. Not too bad. Definitely not the score that this chip is capable of scoring on a better motherboard. PC player here. We're going to score somewhere around 20. Can't remember exactly what the frame rate was last time when I was testing this earlier, I mean. Yeah, 25.6. That's actually pretty respectable there. You can see that the VLB card, this T-Sync ET4000, definitely has some more room for improvement there. But I think this motherboard is holding it back severely. We'll take a look at the Doom run here. And it looks pretty good. Again, definitely not what a Pentium 166 with MMX would normally score on a socket 5 or 7 board with a much better chipset and EDO RAM. But yeah, it's not doing too bad. $1,829 real ticks. Again, not too bad, but I'm pretty sure my Pentium 60 can outpace that. Of course, that's not with VLB. Quake's not too bad on this processor, on this motherboard. You can definitely scream through this benchmark pretty good. Again, I am capturing this at 30 frames per second. And we got a final score of 21.4 frames per second. Definitely think the chipset's holding this video card back. I think this video card probably has a bit more to offer. So you can see the identification utility here, 166.6 megahertz. All these benchmarks seem to detect that speed a little bit differently. Let's go ahead and see what SpeedSys has to say on the subject. Get us a nice little baseline of performance here. You can see again the memory bandwidth 45.28 megabytes a second. 122.84. Well, we're a little bit faster than the Pentium 133, at least according to this. Somewhere right in between the 133 and the 233 there. Well, the Cyrix 233 anyway. That's probably, yeah, that's probably about the right score for a 166 chip. You can see how fast the memory test here has dropped off in performance. At least it's going through that test pretty quickly here. I'm not going to go through the whole test here, but you can see how low that test is performing there. But the key performance hit, I believe, I'm pretty sure, is that memory bandwidth. It's just not enough. It's like the Pentium 60 board, the exact same chipset as this. It's a 32-bit memory controller, so we're not getting the kind of throughput that we should be getting on this chip, on this on the memory, I should say. But it is what it is. It is a little bit faster because, well, we're running at 6 megahertz more clock speed, which is giving us about a 10% boost over the 60 megahertz score. Alright, we'll do a quick run of Descent here. Let's see how it plays on this. Not bad at all. This is nice and smooth. It's not too bad at all. Definitely, it feels about like a overclocked 586 chip. Maybe a little bit faster than that. It is pretty smooth though. Smooth and responsive. This is a pretty nice speed for Descent. It does feel like though it's being held back a little bit, but we're just trying to get as much out of this video card as we possibly can, and just to see what it can do. Unfortunately, this motherboard is not the fastest VLB chipset that Opti made, but the premium chipset is, from my test on the Pentium 60 board that I have, it is a little bit faster, but it's not, you know, crazy faster. So it's kind of hard to be able to determine whether or not this VLB platform, if it had been supported correctly by the Pentium chips, how much further it could have actually gone in performance. But let's go ahead and put in a second processor that I have, which will get us a little bit more clock speed. The WinChip C6 processor. That's should be kind of interesting to see what that does compared to this. Alright, so I switched it over to the Centaur Halls IDT WinChip C6 processor. You see we're getting a score of 400. We're getting a little bit more out of this chip than we did the Pentium MMX. So not too bad. I can get this score out of a 586, but or very close to that score, but not too bad. Not too bad. And just to verify that we are running the IDT WinChip C6 here, 200 megahertz, without any kind of problem whatsoever on this motherboard. Again, we're running the usual slew of benchmarks here, Superscape, and we're going to end up with a score of 80.1, and which is a little bit faster than the Pentium 166 MMX chip, indicating that there is still some more headroom to go with this VLB video card, the T-Sync ET4000. PC Player here is going to score, I believe, a little bit slower than the MMX chip did, than the Pentium 166 MMX chip did. Yeah. Just a little bit, but not by much. And here we are with Doom once again. It's running pretty good. Not too bad. It's definitely playable. And I'm going to cut this out and come back when the score has been reached on this benchmark here. And here we go. 2033 real ticks, a little bit slower than the Pentium MMX chip at 166 megahertz. You can see Quake's churning away pretty good here again. And I'll come back when the final score has been reached. So as you can see, the WinChip C6 was only able to pull off 17.5 frames per second on this motherboard, indicating that it's really not all that great of an upgrade for this older motherboard, but it is possible. It obviously works just fine as advertised, since these processors were intended to be used to upgrade these older socket 5 motherboards, and this is about as old as you're going to get, and about as incompatible with newer processors as you can get as well. But you can see that it's definitely quite a bit lower than the Pentium 166 MMX chip was. Socket 7 face-off video, both these chips were ran in it. The Pentium MMX at 200, and then again this chip at 200, and both those chips scored pretty much double the frame rate is the scoring on this motherboard. But you can see that there is an improvement with the Pentium 166, indicating that there is still plenty of headroom that this video card has to go. It's just being held back by this motherboard. Looking at PC config here, you can see that this is showing the clock speed at only 144 megahertz. Not really sure why, because the other one shows it running at 199. One of those little inconsistencies. Looks to me like the PC speed benchmark at the top there is a little bit faster than the 166 MMX chip was, just by a little bit. And let's do another run of Descent real quick here, the same level as before. We'll just see how it feels here. And it feels about the same as it did on the other one. It's a nice playback rate. It is nice, but it definitely doesn't feel like a 200 megahertz Pentium processor. That's for sure. Neither did the other one feel like 166 megahertz with Descent. But it is nice. It's smooth. It's playable. It's not bad. It's not bad. I think basically my conclusion for this board is going to be that it's quite an interesting way to run vintage hardware. This board is definitely not anywhere near the league of other socket 5 and socket 7 motherboards that came after this and that were around at this time. This motherboard would have been sold. And I'm pretty sure I know for a fact the Intel VX chipset and FX chipset and TX and HX and I know even the later VIA and SYS and all those guys are, well, they're quite a bit faster than this. Opti wasn't known for being a very good performing chipset at this time, and it's definitely kind of shown here. But they're good. I mean, they work good, they're stable, and they were cheap too, you know. A lot of OEMs use them to have low-cost computers, as well as PC builders and computer shops. But you can see that there's definitely a significant performance hit with this motherboard. So it's a bit unfortunate. I was hoping for a little bit more, but then again, I'm really not all that surprised. This is pretty much what I kind of remember from years ago when I ran this board, and that's why I never really ran this board in the system. But it does its job. It does its job, you know, good enough. And this was quite a neat little test to see how far we could push the processors on a VLB motherboard. And at some point I may get another socket 5 VLB motherboard, but for right now, I think this is going to be about it for this test. There's another one that I saw that has the Opti Premium chipset, which is a little bit faster, but only by a few frames per second. in Quake. And when I say a few, I mean about 2.5 with a Pentium 60 chip. So I would imagine the same probably percentage of increase would be seen on socket 5 as well. But as you can see, it definitely runs. So maybe at some point I'll take a look at that. But for right now, this is good enough for the test. So as you can see from the benchmarks there, I don't think that the implementation of VLB on a Pentium was really all that great. I don't know of any other chipset manufacturers that did this. I've only ever seen Opti, and well, it works. That's about all I can really say for it. The 32-bit memory controller is definitely hitting the performance on this thing. The lack of being able to run in right-back cache mode is also hurting the performance. And even though we were able to get about 20 frames per second out of this platform in Quake, it's still significantly less than that processor would be capable of pushing through a little bit more modern socket 5 or socket 7 board with the PCI video card. I don't think it's the video card that's at fault here. I think it's just the implementation and the way that Opti had to include the VLB controller into the chipset in order to be able to interface it to that Pentium processor. On a 46, the VLB has a lot of connections to the processor, to the cache, and to the memory as well, so it has a lot of paths directly to those three components. But on this, everything's having to go through that VLB controller on the chipset there. So I think all Opti did was basically take a 46 chipset that they already currently had, and they kind of tweaked and fiddled it a little bit to work with the Pentium processors, and then they rebadged it and sold it on these motherboards. It works, but it's not that great. The other chipset that's a little bit higher than this, a little bit faster than this, is the premium chipset. I do have a motherboard with that on it, but it's a socket 4, not a socket 5. There is a socket 5 board on eBay. I don't really know that I really feel like buying it. I don't think it's really worth it to me to buy it. I'd like to see the performance. I'd like to see the performance on a little bit better chipset with more processing power than the Pentium 60 or 66 can do. But I don't know that it's really worth it. Yeah, I'd probably guess it would push Quake up to 25, maybe closer to 30 frames per second through this video card. But I don't think it's going to be able to do more than that. That chipset does have a true 64-bit memory controller, though, so it might come into play there with faster processors than the Pentium 60 or 66 can do. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting way to run a vintage computer. These boards are not very common, so I wouldn't recommend it. But it's not very fast either. A good, 586 133 could best this thing pretty easily. So yeah, it was a fun experiment to see how this would actually perform. I've never actually benchmarked this board. I have ran it in the past and found it was kind of a weak performer even back then. But the fact that the BIOS has been bad on this board for a long time are actually missing. Long story there. But anyway, now I got it back up and running. I could do the benchmarks there. Because the BIOS doesn't have PCI support enabled in it, I can't run a PCI video card and do a direct comparison. I'll have to do that on a probably the 586 platform at some point in the future. I do plan on continuing to do VLB comparison videos, and I'd like to see direct comparison between PCI and VLB. The T-Sync ET6000 on PCI does perform very similarly to the T-Sync ET4000 on VLB, so I think they're a very good card to compare to each other. Try to figure this out. I also have a couple Mach 32 PCI and a Mach 32 VLB, so I'll probably include those at some point. But for right now, this is Wayback Tech signing off, everyone. Peace out.